Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, thanks for tuning in to the podcast. I'm Bob Nickman. This is The Exploding Human. I got a great guest today, a guy named JOE MCQUILLEN, who I want to take a second to thank Jimmy Cohen, who turned me on to Joe. He said, "You've got to interview this guy. He's an old friend of mine, and he's got an amazing story." And he does. And I wanted to read, Joe's written a book, and this book is about a couple-year journey that he's had since the passing of his son. And I wanted to read you some of the summary that he has written, and then we'll get into the interview. So this is what Joe says. "On the morning of January 3rd, 2016, my world was turned inside out forever. I received a call from a lake house in Wisconsin that my son and 3 of his friends were missing. After a celebration marking the end of Christmas break from college, the boys jumped in a canoe and paddled out on the icy lake. They never came back. My heart was broken, and my soul was crushed. How could a vibrant 21-year-old not be coming home? How could a loving God do this? How could he do this to me? I needed to do something. I was aware of mediums and the other side. I needed to figure out if it was fact or fiction. I was not about to buy in just to placate my grief. If it was real, I wanted to know more. I wanted in. If it wasn't real, I wanted to know that too, and scratch it off the list." So here's my interview with JOE MCQUILLEN and his journey talking to mediums. What's the title of the book? Let's start with that.
The book is My Search for Christopher on the Other Side.
Right. And your son passed away in 2016. You're coming up on 3 years since that happened.
Correct.
And as I was reading your summary of your book, that you're not somebody who, what I would call is woo-woo. That's what I like to call that stuff.
Yeah.
But you sought out to communicate with Christopher, and you're not somebody, as you stated in your summary, that really is somebody that was really big on this stuff. You were skeptical, and you went on a search. And so what was the first thing that happened in terms of looking to communicate?
You know, a couple things happened, Bob. One is that you're right. I mean, if you could see me in person, you'd know that I'm not a woo-woo. You know, I've got a brush cut. I got a broken nose. You know, I still play hockey. I'm a blue-collar kid at heart.
Yeah.
But when my son crossed, what really inspired this, Bob, is when he died between 3 and 4 a.m. He crossed over between 3 and 4 a.m. on January 3rd. I woke up in a state of panic, and it was, a dream about showing up at school without your homework or naked or something that made no sense, but that dread never left me. So when all of this started piecing together, that kind of thought went through the grief, and all I thought of was, did he stop by to visit me on the way on the other side? And how does that work? Who do I contact? What do I do? And so I started a search. And bottom line is, I wanted to know if this area of insight has merit. I want to know, and I want to pursue it. And if it doesn't, I want to know that, and I want to discard it. So I didn't go in, hoping against hope that I could, this is the only way that this would work. But I began to seek out this path as more results were successful. so that led me to continuing going forward.
And who was the first medium that you contacted?
The first medium I contacted, and she's in Surprise, Arizona now, and her name is Nancy. And Nancy, I had seen her probably in 2001, or just kind of on a curiosity thing to see what somebody talked to me about her. And I went and saw her, and there was nobody I was intensely seeking for on the other side. I had brothers and sisters. I'm from a big Irish Catholic family, so people die. The larger the family, the more tragedy you have. So there was a normal cause of, or abnormal, of death in the family, and so I was just kind of curious and trying to connect a little more spiritually. I've been in recovery for 33 years now, so it was kind of something that I wanted to put together with seeking God's grace and such. And so I thought I'd check this channel out, and I was bored and really underwhelmed until she got to one point where she looked at me and said, "Your dad's here." And he's showing me a caboose and he's saying railroad, and that you'd understand. And my mind stopped. I mean, the bottom line is we were a railroad family. My dad worked 40 years on a railroad. We had 5 boys. We all worked on the railroad in school. We were a railroad family. And this was 2000. This was before Google search. This was before anything. You couldn't look up my father today. You couldn't look up my father and see anything about what he had done, or didn't exist then. And so I was in awe. But then I shelved it because there was no real reason to pursue it. So when this thing happened to Chris, I reached out to Nancy, and she actually described the events of his crossing and what happened, and right down to the Timberland boots and roughhousing and inebriation, and so then I started pursuing that, and that led to the next and the next. This book was never an idea of mine. I kept copious notes because I wanted to review them later on when I was hurting. But then I got a message that I'm supposed to write a book to help other guys, and that's specifically guys, fathers who've lost kids because they don't seem to have the same outlet, socially acceptable outlet. So, that's who I was trying. That's who I'm trying to reach. But I really want to reach anybody who's had a loss. And that's what I'm told to do. So that's what I'm doing.
It's amazing. How many mediums have you spoken to over the last 3 years?
6, 7. There was Nancy. There was the first one I did in person, who's become kind of a pal. Andrew Anderson are kind of pals. I'm pals with Andrew and Thomas John. Who's famous. He's got his own TV show. So 6, 7, some local, some big time, all amazing and all gifted. There was one medium that I met, and I like her, and I knew her in my past, and it didn't click, but I think there are great relief pitchers and good relief pitchers. I think there are great running backs and good running backs, and I think there are great mediums and good mediums. The day of the charlatan gypsy is gone. The internet doesn't allow frauds anymore, and the veil is thinning so much that the availability to reach out and contact a medium is pretty easy and not that expensive.
Did some of the mediums corroborate each other?
They all corroborated each other.
They really did. So like the events of the accident, they all saw it the same way or experienced it the same.
There's one local gal, Sherry Jewell's good gal, and she said, the boys were all inebriated, so it was like passing out. There was no real pain. It was a little bit surprised of feeling water in their lungs. She said, but I see the Mad Hatter, which means they were all not only drunk, but they were under some influences, So, and that's been a consistent theme. It was 3:00 in the morning. They were college boys. They were rock and rolling, and they decided to jump into a canoe for a lark, and it ended badly. But the experience of the crossing and the inebriation has been touched by everyone. I have a niece who passed in 2012 that every medium has said she greeted Chris when Chris crossed over, And one medium named the year she crossed her name, the 2 children that she left, adopted children, and their name. So it's like,
Wow.
and you couldn't look up Joe McQuillen and see her. She was my sister's daughter, so her she was born Ryan, Carrie Ryan. She married Bill Van Cott, so her married name was Van Cott. She adopted 2 Korean boys, Alex and Ryan. There's no finding this out anywhere. There's no paper trail for this. So all that did is just reinforce my belief of something that has become a knowing at this point in my life.
How were you able to actually communicate with your son?
Great question, because mediums are clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, and most of them have a couple of those. So clairvoyant means they actually see. Andrew Anderson sees Chris, and he said he's like looking through him through a thin veil of pea soup. He sees him clearly, but it's just a little discolored, a little off. Clairaudient means you hear. All of them feel. Clairsentience. When I know Chris is around me, I feel him on the back of my neck. I feel a tingle. I've smelled him. I'm dying to see him, and I've been trying to work on that skill. It's just I can't throw a curveball either, Bob. So I think that's a similar thing. I think I could work all day long and not throw a curveball. So as much as I'm trying to, but it's kind of funny that I'm more audible than I am visual. I'd rather listen to a book on audio, a book downloaded than read a book. I retain more. I mean, I did that in school. I could retain more from a lecture than I could reading. So the consistent thing is I'm getting messages from him audibly because that's the most advanced form that I can accept. I try to meditate. I land my chakras. I do all these crazy things that you wouldn't look at me and think I would do, burn sage, have crystals. And I try to raise my consciousness up. Now, what spirit has to do is lower their consciousness to try to meet us. We're kind of spiritual slugs on this end. So when they choose to come visit us, they're slowing down. But you got to do your part. You got to raise your consciousness up. You've got to clear your mind. You've got to meditate. I pull out different pictures of Chris and put them on my desk and meditate on him. Inhaling, it's called city meditation, where you inhale and exhale. And what I would do prior to Chris was exhale the word of God, the name of God, whatever name you choose. And now I do it, and I exhale Christopher's name. Chris doesn't replace God. Chris is with God, but I'm trying to bring him into my consciousness. So as I raise my level of consciousness, he lowers his. We meet on a certain plane, and in my case, it's mostly audible.
I never thought of it of the spirit lowering their consciousness to communicate, but it makes complete sense.
Right.
I had an experience. Have you had dream experiences with him?
What, that first one I have, and then there's been other times where I've known he's been, and I've had mediums tell me that he's been in the room and that I've just felt his presence with me. None that I've woken up and said, I got a message from him, but I've known that he's, the nice thing about this, and when you read the book, is that he was a wild kid. I was a wild kid. I got him. He got me. And so we could just be often. There were times that we could just hang out and barely talk, but communicate a lot. So it's kind of amazing that I actually had a session with him the other night. 3:00 in the morning is when it always happens for me. I get up at 3:00 in the morning. At my age, you get up 3:00 in the morning a lot anyhow.
Something's enlarged, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And it's not just my spirituality, So 3:00 in the morning, so I got up, and he said, I don't really feel like talking now, Pop. Can't we just be like we used to? Can't we just be together? And I spent the rest of the time listening to some meditative music and feeling him around me. He didn't want to talk, and I get it. And just grateful. I was just grateful to have him with me.
I had an experience. My father passed away a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
At 95 years old, pretty
Okay.
amazing, long life. And both my sister and I felt that he was had not crossed over to wherever we go, and that he was restless.
Right.
and it wasn't a completed sort of, he kind of fought the whole thing spiritually, and he wasn't afraid to die, but he thought the process would be painful, which it was not. But he still wasn't, we both felt this. And I was sort of felt kind of disturbed because I did feel it. And after a number
Yeah.
of, I don't know, maybe 10 days, I was sleeping having a dream one night, and my grandfather, who was my mother's father, I was in a house, a very old sort of wooden house with this beautiful wooden staircase, and there was a curtain, and I was sitting in a chair, and this curtain parted, and my grandfather walked down the stairs. Now, he died when I was 16, which was, almost 50 years ago.
Yeah.
He came down and I was very close to him. He came down the stairs. He was completely silent, and he looked at me, and then he looked up the stairs, and I'm getting teary. I'm sorry.
Yes. No.
Yeah, my father came down the stairs. He was younger. He was probably in his
Right.
30s. It was the way he looked when I was a child. His hair was dark and thick, and he had the biggest smile on his
Yeah.
face.
Yeah.
And he hugged me, and he was so happy. And I went, "Oh, he did it. He's there. He's with my grandfather. He's with all those people." And it wasn't, to me, it's not a dream. To me, that's an
No.
experience, because it
Right.
still lives with me.
Right.
Still, a year later, I still feel that experience, and I'm so
You're still in
happy.
awe of it. I can tell you're still in awe
Oh,
of that
it was
experience.
beautiful. I was so happy for him that he was this timeless, happy person, because the end of his life was not that pleasant in terms of his, physical health and all that stuff. So it was just an extraordinary thing. He was healthy and happy and vibrant, and I was like, wow.
You've had you've had an experience with the other side. I mean, that's to me, that's I've done a whole lot of research, and that's really consistent with what happens. I mean, so if you wanted validation, do research what you just experienced. I mean, and this is, believe me, I knew nothing about this before I stumbled on this with the loss of my son, is that when they come to you, they usually come in their prime, whatever their prime was. In my case, Christopher was 21 years old. He was prime, beautiful, looked like Brad Pitt, you know.
Mhm.
So when he comes to me, it's always, and it probably always will be as a 21-year-old. Your dad's going to come to you, and your grandfather was probably in his prime. Whatever prime was. To be honest with you, I'm almost 62. I'm happier with me at 62 than I was ever. This is probably the way I'll come to
Mhm.
people when I visit them, when I cross. But what it does do is take away, when you buy in, it does take away any fear from crossing over, because we're at boot camp here, Bob. We're in boot camp. We're in 3 a days. We're in training camp. They're on Maui in a beach hut, having the time of their lives. That's the deal. This is preparation for that. Um, so what are we giving up? What are we holding on to when it's time? I've got a lot of work still to do, including this book and talking to fine guys like you. But if God came to me and tapped on the shoulder and said, "Hey, bro, time to go," I've lived a life beyond my wildest dreams, and I get to see my son again. So, how bad a deal is that? And it's in paradise, literally, like palm trees. What do you want? What's your version of paradise?
Mhm.
My father-in-law was a big hunter, and he comes through in hunting garb because that was his paradise. That's what he loved. Um, that's the amazing thing is the amount of information out there when you need to know, when you want to know, when you're driven to know, is a lot. There's actually a book called, I kid you not, called Idiot's Guide to the Other Side.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful, right? And so you'll page through and go, wait a minute, what about, I wrote this. So what happens with me is a couple times a month between 3 and 4 a.m., always between 3 and 4 a.m., I get the urge to come into the office, you know, set up, turn the computer off so it's no glow, light some candles, write some sage, do some meditating. And then I'll get messages from my son. The first time it was a year in. It was a year after his death, at the anniversary, and he told me, be nice to a certain kid that was showing up. It was his house that the party was at, and I had this resentment that had nothing to do with reality, and so I knew that didn't originate with me because it wasn't in my DNA. I'm Irish. You know what Irish Alzheimer's is, where you forget everything but the grudges. I wanted to hold on to this resentment forever. And yet 12 hours later, I'm at the grave, 20 kids show up and there's him and he's crying and we embrace. Because Chris said, you got to, he was just being him. Let it go, Dad. You got to forgive him. I loved him and he loved me. Now, when you go back and analyze that, you look at that, you say, wow, that didn't originate with me. And that's when you know it's real. In my case, up until weeks before I was finishing the book, I thought it was automatic writing. And it's not. It's called channel writing or spirit writing. Automatic writing happens, but it's an entirely different thing. It's where you go into a trance, you write in a different handwriting you don't recognize. So I had to go back and change every one of the terms that I write about in my book from channel writing to spirit writing, because that's what it is. Mine is, he'll come in and say, hey, Pop, what's going on? It's beautiful here. It's blue. It's like a beach. And then he'll talk, and then he'll talk about his siblings and his mom and what I should do. And he harassed the crap out of me to get this book finished. He wouldn't let me go. He wouldn't let me off the hook. So I felt every keystroke he was with me writing this book.
Have the other members of your family communicated with him? It sounds like you were very, very connected to him.
I was
already, but I was just wondering if the other members of your family, especially since you've been on this exploration, have they had experiences?
Yes, my wife has had a few of her own, and we've gone to mediums together, and it's amazing. Went to see a guy named Thomas John, who's this world famous medium. He was in Highland Park, town where Jimmy Cohn's from, or he's from Deerfield, but town right over. And there's 75 people in the room, and he walked over to us 45 minutes in and said, "Who's got an older brother named Jerry? Who's got a son named Chris that crossed?" He said, "Wow, your family just keeps showing up. They're kind of scaring me," because he was laughing, but there was so many. And Sally was there, and he looked, he said, excuse me, he said, "Who's Sally?" And I pointed to my wife. He said, no, 100 years old, and her name's Sally. And that was my wife's grandmother made it to 100 years old, and her name was Sally. And so she was here, and she said she doesn't have much to tell you, but she wants you to know that she watches out for you. Now, wait a minute, that's Sally Mickle. There's no connection in names. This guy wouldn't know that, even if he wanted to, which he doesn't want to. He was practicing a craft that he has, a skill that he has. So my son William has seen Andrew Anderson a couple of times and saw, and got some amazing messages. One about a tattoo that we didn't know about.
Oh,
he got his brother's the same tattoo, the family crest. And so and my daughter Caroline doesn't want to talk about it. She's just not ready to embrace it. When she's ready, she will.
Is she younger?
No, she's a senior in college.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris has said more than once, when she's ready, I'll be here. I'll help her, Dad. He's commented on her boyfriend, who's an ex-boyfriend now, and he just said, I don't like him.
Really?
So they do understand what's going on in our lives, and they're not, the humor's the same. If you're a strong personality, then, when we were at Thomas John just a couple weeks ago, he said, you have an older sister, Pat, who died, and she died a couple years ago, my oldest sister. I said, yeah. He said, Christopher's behind her making bunny ears, and that's a typical Chris move, just cracking everybody up. So, we don't change personalities. Think about walking. You're Bob. You walk out the sliding glass door behind you, Bob, to your patio.
Yeah.
You're still Bob, right? You're still Bob. We walk to the other side. It's changing rooms. You're the same guy. Hopefully you grow and maybe discard some of the liabilities on this side, but you're the same personality. That's your being.
I would imagine so, that the energy that is us would continue as us
Yeah. Right. There's a great quote from the secret about energy. You can't be destroyed. I mean, energy's energy. This took me a while to grasp that and it was actually from a quote from a Catholic priest who ended up getting defrocked in the 1800s that said, we're spiritual beings having a physical existence. So that same Bob, the energy, Bob, the personality, when you shed this shell, you're still going to be Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you choose to come back or not is your call. But when you come back, there'll still be segments of Bob, right? You'll still be that energy.
Well, I had this experience. I've talked about it on another one of my podcasts briefly a few months ago. But since we're talking about it, I do remember the moment when I was born. Not physically, like
I know.
what I remember is being sort of catapulted from this darker place, not dark, psychically or emotionally. It's just physically dark. And it was this high energy, like going from one place to another. It was very high energy. And I remember the first thing was I was frightened. And then there was a moment because of the energy, I was kind of like, whoa. And then the moment was I said to myself, oh, yeah, this again. And I got this huge internal smile. And I remember that. And I remembered it all through my childhood. I never really told anybody about it until later. But I had that experience. And you can't prove it, but it was real for me. And I've always known that.
I think what's really cool, Bob, is that you don't realize that what you've just described is very common, that of being born. And there's a trauma.
Yeah, no shit.
There's a bunch of books that have been written, usually poorly or dryly, about those experiences, but that, when you're coming into this is traumatic, but it's also amazingly common. 70% of people have had some experience with contact with the other side, whether it was your dad's dream, your dream about being reborn into. There's a guy who wrote a great book, Bob Olson, when he was an investigator, and his dad passed, and he wanted to find out if it was real or BS. So he took it upon himself to interview mediums, psychics, and all mediums are psychics, but not all psychics are mediums. And so to see if it was real or not, And so, he did an amazing job, and it's a great book he wrote, about the other side. And he did this amazing job, but a great description that he has about, soul is that, spirit and soul. Your spirit is one spirit. That's Bob. You're Bob. So think of Bob's a wave, but your soul is an ocean that eventually joins everybody else's soul. So when you come into another life, your spirit's still who Bob was, but it's a new soul, part of your soul that then emerges into this life. The soul is the bigger entity. And so that kind of brought some clarity into, I got to tell you, Bob, it's real or crazy as it sounds. One of my fears was once I bought in that Chris was on the other side, that we'd cross paths. I'm going the other side because I'm going to be I'm rounding third now, bro. I'm 62, right? So, and then he's going to be coming here, and I'll miss the kid that I'm, I so miss already, and that doesn't happen. He'll be there when I cross over. Actually, he's told me. He said, "Dad, I'll be here." And he said the learning curve will be a lot less for you than me, because he said I was surprised, I was shocked. You won't be. You'll know what's happening because of the descriptions that we've had, the conversations that we've had. So I got that going for me, which is nice.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even think. Yeah, I guess there would be a learning curve to be somewhere else.
Right. You show up and you're like, people out of your past are showing up and hugging you, and you're like, what the frig is going on here? But he said, and we had this great conversation, and he said, look, you're not going to have that. First of all, he said, the minute you step over, I'll be there. And second, because of what we've been talking about for the last year, 2 years, or conversations year, you're not going to be surprised by any of this. This will all make sense to you.
It sounds like too that the more you've allowed yourself to immerse yourself in this this idea and have made contact in different ways that you've gotten better at it. Like it's almost like a muscle that's been exercised.
Right.
So it's less, certainly less frightening, probably actually very attractive to you.
It's exactly right. And I actually write about the book where I said, like, if you're a golfer and you have a bad swing and you practice the bad swing, you're just going to be a worse golfer. So you've got to kind of gather some knowledge to figure out what you're doing, you know, and like, idiot's guide, right? So that I want to expand my knowledge about the other side so that I become better at it. It's intentional. It's not an accident now. As I work on meditation, I'm better at it. The
Yes.
ADD doesn't kick in as quickly as it used to. I'm better at it. I'm not surprised by certain things. I'm not distracted. I don't fall asleep. So it's like anything else. If you want to learn, you want to putt a lot. Learn how to do it right. And so it's a similar thing that you do. I am better at this, and I'll continue. And actually, in the book, he's reprimanded me, he busted my stones a few times about not working hard enough.
Really?
Yeah. And then other times he says, "You're doing great, Dad. I'm really proud of you." And other times he'll say, "Hey, spend a little more time, get better at this. What's more important? We're all going there, Bob. We might as well figure this thing out."
I don't know why I just thought of this, but have you been in communication with some of the other parents of
Great question. You know what? They all went to this. They were all the same group of kids, but it was a big group. So two of the boys, my Christopher and a kid named Patrick, were very close, and we loved Patrick. He was at the house a lot. We knew him. The other two boys were friends of friends, and they all knew each other. So we all saw each other up they all died in a canoe accident. We all went up at the lake house and I was heading up there, and it was a rescue mission. And halfway up there, I got the call that it was a search because they knew that a recovery because they knew they were all gone, right? And so I knew that we parents kind of huddled around together, and I'm a bit of a loner in those situations, so I kind of wandered out to the porch and walked around outside cold winter. So everybody approaches grief differently, so there hasn't been any joint. We attempted. There was one family that, I attempted to be, and they just needed their privacy, and I respect that. So no, but there are other groups of families, parents helping parents online, and other things that where people do share their grief, and to some it's an amazing healing experience. Some people, it keeps them in the pain too long. I gave up judging. There was a great movie called Mr. 3000, a baseball movie, and there was a character there called Boca, and every time the main character would say something, he said, "Just do your thing, man. Just do your thing." And that's kind of how I'm approaching life these days, Bob. Everybody gets to do their own thing. Whatever you need to heal, God bless you. If but not everybody's going to buy into what we're talking about. Not everybody's going to buy into this book, and that's okay too. Whatever you need to do,
Yeah.
As the great 20th century philosopher Sonny Bono said, "The beat goes on."
The beat goes on. Yes. Row, row, row your boat. That's what we do.
Timeless wisdom.
Yeah, it really is. That song has become more profound as the years go on.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing this. Let the name of the book again. Let's let our people know who are listening.
Great. My Search for Christopher on the Other Side. Mm-hmm. It's being published by Janet Hagen Books. She's a wonderful publisher. I adore her. Chris, to be honest with you, grabbed hold of her and wouldn't let go. She actually said, "Okay, I give up. He's not leaving me alone." She said, "I can ignore your phone calls, but he won't leave me alone. So let's do this book."
And it's coming out next month, right?
December 17th on Amazon. It'll be on Amazon, and eventually, I think Barnes and Noble online. It'll be immediately available through Kindle. And then a couple months down the road, there'll be an Audible version for guys like me who listen better than they read. So
yeah, I hope that it does really well because it's an important topic, and especially from what I would say, you were probably a skeptic before you went into a lot of this.
You're right.
And
You're
that,
spot on.
and I, skeptics make the best advocates
Right.
because they've
Right.
questioned it the whole way, and then they like,
Right. I believed in God, and I've always said this is that, to once I got my journey in sobriety, I connected more with God. Prior to that, I felt, God was like, I believe in I believe in the Attorney General. I believe in the Secretary of the Navy. I know I believe in them. I've just had no need to have a relationship with them, and that changed with me with my recovery. And then it really kicked in, Bob, when Chris. And here's something interesting that I'll close with. When Chris died, I get on my knees just to acknowledge a higher power and thank him for another day. And I did. But at the end of it, I would say, "But I'm pissed you took my son." And then I'd go to bed, and and for the first couple of weeks, took an Ambien so I could sleep. And then I finally got a message, and the message was, "I didn't take your son. Your son's free will and recklessness made him come home early, caused him to come home early. I welcomed him. I'm grateful he's home, but I lost a son too. And I was there holding you in those dark nights when you couldn't sleep."
wow.
So I then turned from God being the one who took my son to God being the biggest advocate and for my son's care. So my whole viewpoint changed. He wasn't the guy to blame. He wasn't the bad guy. You know, um, and I know that where my son is now is a phenomenal place because he never hung around long enough if it wasn't.
That's a beautiful way to look at it,
Yeah.
and I believe it.
So do I, buddy.
Yeah.
So do I.
Thanks so much for talking to me, Joe. And people who are listening, check out his book when it comes out.
Yeah, maybe we'll give him a shout out right before it's published, because I think I'm grateful for the opportunity to have a book and have a book written. I promised him I'd finish it by Father's Day, and then have it published within the same calendar year is insane. So you got to know some things are working behind the scenes. That's a lot more, a lot brighter than just me. Some good things are happening because I think somebody upstairs likes us.
I believe that too. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Have a great day. I'm going to turn off the recording, and
Okay.
we can still talk for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, we did talk longer. It was great. What a great guy, and what an amazing book that this is coming out in December, and I want to check it out myself, and I will. That was Joe McQuillen.